Disaster. This video from Jim Davidson, who was on Mount Everest with a group of climbers when a devastating earthquake triggered a deadly avalanche.
In the days after the earthquake, Jim and other climbers from Colorado helping with the recovery out there. You can just see all these pictures of the devastation. Dr. John Kudrowski and Jim Davidson are here to tell us more about their story. Guys, good morning. And let me start with where you both were located. You can kind of see the map back there, the base camp on the bottom. So you were at the base camp, and Jim, you were further up the mountain?
Correct, about 2,500 feet above up at Camp 1.
Does that make it different? I mean, were your situations different when it hit?
Yeah, similar, but very different in terms of the things that happened.
Yeah, I mean, we were both worried about the same kind of things with the earthquake and avalanche, but we have an ice fall below us, so we can't get back down, and these guys are below the ice fall and other ice cliffs, so it's a different set of problems for both of us.
So how do you solve those problems? What do you do when you're in the middle of this, and what goes through your mind?
Well, up at Camp 1, when the glacier started bucking up and down vertically when the earthquake hit, that's when we knew something really big was going on. We've got avalanches coming down from both sides, but we had to stay put because we were surrounded by avalanches and crevasses. John's problem in base camp was different.
Yeah, I mean, in base camp, the big Serac came off Pomori, and of course that's been popularized in the news with the big compressed air blast that came across base camp, and almost 20 people were killed, and about 70 or 80 people were injured. And so that was a whole different process in itself. And for me, on a sort of personal level, was going and sort of also checking through the disaster zone on people that I knew, Jim included. Of course, Jim's camp was on the lower end of base camp and was unscathed. Our other friend, Alan Arnett, his camp was completely destroyed. And at the time, I didn't know if those guys were in camp or not. Wow. Found out later they were above base camp in Camp 1.
So, I mean, listen, you guys are climbing Everest. It's easy to say you're tough dudes to begin with, but as positive as you try to stay through all this, did you have a moment where you said to yourself, I might not make it out of this?
Yeah, when we had the avalanches crashing down on two sides, as my teammate and I were trying to get out of the tent, he said, what do we do? I said, put on your avalanche beacon, sort of a transceiver so they can find you under the snow. And I thought, maybe they'll find me alive, or maybe they'll just be able to find my body better. But when I came out of the tent and the ground was bucking and the avalanche was coming from both sides, I felt pretty sure we were not going to survive the next few minutes. We just had to stand there in the clouds and wait to see if the avalanche got to us.
Yeah, and it was a really eerie day. I mean, it was really foggy, so at first you couldn't see where it was coming from at all. You know, and for us in base camp, then we saw this giant white cloud start coming down, and then it went across the central part of base camp. You know, and yeah, that was just really scary, and the uncertainty was there, because then you didn't know
what's next.
Yeah, what's next? Finding friends, but also figuring out who had survived, where people were. You know, and then of course the bigger picture was the Nepal and the people of Nepal, and you know, not only how were you going to get out of the country, but are the lower villages safe? What's Kathmandu like? So it was just all kinds of uncertainty.
And so once you did get back, when did you realize the scope? Was it until you got back on terra firma, or how did you eventually figure out how big this had been?
It kind of comes in an increasing wave. At first we understand that there's an earthquake and other camps are affected. We're checking on each other to see how our sort of local community is, and then as you realize the scope of it, you say, oh wow, this affected the whole region. This was a big quake. Oh my goodness, the bad news coming out of Kathmandu and other cities. So it just kind of grows, and it does have a sort of a psychological effect on you too, because you realize you're just a small part of a very big problem, and people have a lot of challenges ahead of them in Nepal.
Tough to see the earthquake overnight now, 7.3. I mean, that's insult to injury for these guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a case of like kick somebody while they're down. It's just really not fair. And we've heard from lots of our friends that are still sort of over there, they're aiding with the recovery efforts, or a good friend of mine, Arnold Koster, lives in the city of Kathmandu, and you know, him and his family are okay, but we just want to send our thoughts out to everybody there, because it's just going to be a continuing level of recovery, and you know, we just don't know what's going to happen now.
We're just so glad you're back and you're safe, and
kiss the ground, right?
Yes,
absolutely.
We sure appreciate you taking time to tell us your story. My goodness.
Jim and John, and of course they're going to need help out there in Nepal, so don't stop giving if you can find a charity and help out. They're going to need it for quite some time, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely, and what a great interview.